Well, hello, and welcome to anyone who's joining us live and anyone who is watching the recording of this in the future. This is another episode in our Growth Accelerator series where we bring on industry experts to talk about anything related to B2B growth, anything that founders are probably thinking about and curious about. And we are so excited to have Allison on with us today. Allison is the founder and former CEO of Tech Ladies, which is, for anyone who is not familiar, the largest community of women in tech. And it's got over 140,000 members worldwide the last I checked, which is incredible. And then today you are the founder and CEO over at Juniper, which is a boutique content marketing agency for pet brands. So you've got lots of experience and lots of great insights, I think, to share with us, particularly in the realm of community marketing, because it seems like, at least from where I sit, it seems like it kind of like exploded overnight or something. It wasn't really a huge part of the conversation maybe a few years back, and it seems more and more it's really kind of starting to position itself as a key part of not just an alternative to marketing and not just an alternative concept that maybe companies want to engage in, but really something that companies should be looking at. So I would love to just know from your seat, what do you think has been behind that? Like, why do you think community marketing has become such a powerful tool nowadays?
Well, I think it's a mix of factors, but I think the hesitation to build communities before was that it's really such a long-term play to build a community. Yeah. So you really have to be okay with it taking a long time to play out. Although I do think there's kind of ways around that to some degree, which I'll talk about. But then I think we've also seen a shift because of all the changes that have happened where paid media might not be performing. Any one little thing changes on like iOS and now everybody's prices go so far up. So then you can't rely on paid the way that you could before. So basically something that you own, whether it's an email list or owning your community, is so important because it's something that even though it takes a long time to build, it's real if you do it right. And then that you own that audience to some degree. Yeah. So
I realized as you were talking, I was like, there might actually be some people who are joining us who are pretty unfamiliar with the concept, even as just a general idea. So do you want to, if you want to explain it, that would be.
Yeah, I think the way that I think of it, I'm sure people define it in all sorts of ways because it has kind of become like a buzzword. And then when something becomes a buzzword, it's like, what does that even really mean to have a community? Right. So I would define it as either an in-person or online space where you are hosting something and people talk to each other and bring and get value towards each other. And to some degree, it should exist outside of you and your company. So it's not just you talking to people, which is like standard marketing, talking at you in an email, but it's more, how can we get people to be interacting with us? And so I think if you got that interactive element, they're talking to you and they're talking to each other. That's how I would define a community.
Yeah, I think that's such a helpful definition because I think you're right that marketing is, paid media, we're putting something in front of you. Outbound, we're getting something in probably an inbox of yours, or maybe people are coming to their your website and they're looking at your content there or something. But community marketing really does kind of flip the table or whatever, where it's a little bit more not hands off, because I do think it requires a lot of work, but it kind of allows people to, it creates a space for people, right? Where they can interact with each other and, to your point, interact with you, but it's not quite so in your face.
Yeah. And it's not as upfront sales. It's like, I think this is why I say like taking a really long view of it, which is really hard for companies to do because I think they think like people get excited. They're like, oh, community. Yeah, we could just have one of those and then magically sales. And it's like, okay, there's a whole in between, which is building something real. But the reason I still really love community and think it's really worthwhile for people to look at building them for their companies, and this is all sorts of different companies I think could benefit from it, is because like the years are going to go by anyway, like a year in business is so fast now. And so it's like, okay, maybe these people aren't converting for 2 or 3 years, but when they are, they're more likely to stay longer with whatever you're selling because they've built all this trust up with you. And so, the other thing is we've seen a lot of people try to do things where like they pay an influencer to promote a product because they think the influencer has a community, and some influencers do to varying degrees, but it's really hard to buy your way into other communities. So influencer marketing has some gaps in it, right? Like just because it's like an activated amount of comments in a comment section, that isn't really necessarily a community unless the influencer is doing like, maybe if they host a community online somewhere, that's their thing. But a lot of them are just, they have followers. Like followers is not a community necessarily. And then
it's buying an audience in that case.
Yeah, it's more really. Like trying to buy to get in front of an audience. And so you can't really buy your way into this. And then the other thing is that these actual communities that already exist in the topic of whatever you want to get into often have really strict rules about like, you can't post or promote in here. So you can't kind of just go into other communities and blast things out. You'll be blocked, you'll be booted, so building a community from scratch is really valuable in that sense, because you can provide a place for people to talk, help each other and all of that. But, it's hard and it's work and it's hard to put ROI on it. And so it's hard to sell up sometimes to people. So you have to have like a trust and a faith that this is going to play out long-term for you. But something we did at Tech Ladies that I think people could consider is like, even if you're in a small company or have a tight budget, like, so Tech Ladies was completely bootstrapped. I think something that I just sort of did early on was decide that like, it was okay not to make money on the community and to just like, let it run and actually be useful and helpful. And then when we had something to sell, like it's either a fit for you or it's not, but we're never hard selling in the community, that type of thing. And that worked really well for us. But I think you have to have another line of business running. So for us at Tech Ladies, that was our hiring end of services. So our members, if they were looking for jobs, would go over to the job board type of thing. But the community itself would just be there for you and was free. We had 2 communities, a paid and a free community, but a huge free community where you could just get help and support. And I think that works really well, but you almost have to keep it like pure in the sense of like, hey, this community hasn't started paying out yet. Like, okay, well, figure out another business line of revenue to run so that you don't burn out on not seeing like monetary results from it quickly, because you're not going to.
Well, and it is such a like pitfall that so many companies fall into, because they want to see, like, to your point, they want to see immediate ROI. They want to see how, their pipeline is changing as a result and stuff. But I do think, I think there's some parallels to like SEO done well, right? It's like, it's a long-term strategy. Like, you need to kind of be able to swallow the cost of knowing that like, there is also a cost to not doing something, right? Like, if this is part of a proper marketing play or is going to be beneficial down the road, like, you ultimately will lose potential revenue in the long term by not engaging in it. But I love, you touched on some points already. I think, maybe some general ethos stuff related to how you wanted to create a community where it's an organic and authentic space for people to connect. But I'd love for you to drill down into some of the, practical things that were implemented in order to foster that type of a community.
Yeah. So, starting from the beginning, something that worked well for us is that we were having online meetups in person in New York, where we got started. And so I could see like what types of things people were talking about. We were a community for women and non-binary people in tech. So basically like what's important to them and what are we talking about when we have coffee? And I'm talking like a coffee with 15 people, like 5 people at the first one, 15 people at the second one, until we started having like hundreds of people show up to our events type of thing. And then we built an online community that sort of mirrored that. And then everything kind of built out of that until it built into a business. And so, I think like it has to be a community that's real, like people really want or need it and can get something by gathering this group of people together. So there's that, like not starting from we want to make money as a company, but starting from like what does a group of people need that would be helpful for them. And then, if you can find it that it matches a line of business that you're doing, great. But it should, because it has to be real. And like people know, people can tell fake communities from afar. So you don't have to have an in-person element necessarily. We always did like online events as well. And so it did make it feel more real, because you'd go from like the screen to seeing people and then doing a bunch of in-person stuff. So over the years we did everything. But it's nice to have something like that to bring it out of the screen and make it feel real. So I think that's one thing to get it started.
You kind of touched on a mistake already, just by like, this idea of companies maybe falling into the trap of creating a community around what they want rather than what is actually going to be relevant and desirable to the people they want to fill the community with. Are there any other mistakes like that you see companies kind of frequently make when they start community marketing?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to not teach people how to use the space. So a lot of people will just like put up a space and then be like, go in there and talk to each other. It's like, think about if you had a party where you didn't introduce anybody, right? So I think like something that's important to do is sort of like decide what those things are going to be. Like, what are the events that are going to happen in the community? Like, people are going to come in and introduce themselves. I think it is a community. It's important to have somebody doing almost like manual introductions to each other. Like, hey, so-and-so posted about this. You might be interested in that, like that element of networking. And it's very manual. And I just think that that's like important to do if you're starting from absolute scratch, but you want to feel really special. And then telling people what they can talk about, people can be actually really shy in even online spaces. And so you've got your like wallflowers who are just listening to everything in the community and kind of lurking around. And you'll be stuck if you don't find ways to get those people out and interacting. And so sometimes just telling them like, here's the topics that you can post about. So we had in the early days of Tech Ladies, like an anonymous way to write. This is before Facebook had anonymous posting. We were running a community on Facebook, and we would have them like email us, and we would anonymously post for them if they were struggling with something at work. And so like even, just to get them involved. And then also that allowed us to get stories that people were too like shy to put their name or faces on, especially with work related stuff. It would be like, if you have a terrible boss and you're being sexually harassed at work or something, like you can't just go out in a group with your peers and say that. So anonymous posting, and like we had like a name for it. We called it Help a Sister Out. And so we were like, you can write here if you want to do Help a Sister Out. Like we just had these different things that had names that like intro, ask, offer, like telling people how to use it. And also it helps reinforce what your like code of conduct and rules are. So for us, like the only real rule other than, don't harass people, all of that kind of like that safety stuff. The only other rule was like, just don't post job postings, because that's like our one line of business that we're trying to monetize this thing on. If you have a job posting and your company wants to pay for it, like put it on our job board. And so that was the only thing we didn't allow. But like networking, encouraging people to talk together. Hiring did happen like that, and we were like, that's great. You can't also be like too tight about things like that. It's okay to have like one main rule, but you don't want to be like, there's 50 things you can't do in here, because then people are like scared to post anything.
Yeah. I love your idea of there being like an anonymous space where people could write in. Like, I think that's such an like creative idea, because I do think, sometimes what you see is you see people joining a community, right? And like there's a healthy number of people in the community, but then the actual engagement within it is quiet, which at least to me would indicate like there's probably some interest in the general concept of it or something. But then like, especially like the quieter a community is, I think the harder it is probably for people to come in and break that silence and start to like pick up engagement. So did you find like, were your in-person events really integral to getting people to be active within the community? Do you think that helped, I guess, like put people's nerves at ease because they felt like they were engaging with people online that they maybe like had put a face to in person?
I don't know if it was connected, but I think what we tried to do was have similar things, like icebreaker things that would happen when you walk into the room. So for like in-person events, we would play around with things where like we'd have different colored bracelets, and maybe you like green means you work in product and blue means you're in engineering, because we were tech ladies, like you might work in anything. And that was like a strength and one of our weaknesses, because we were like, well, there's so many people, like how are we going to put out content for all of them? So we would do things like that, and just icebreaker things like that in person were so helpful, because then people would be like, product, right? Yeah, me too. Okay, where do you work? And now they're already talking. And so just like finding ways to break the ice and then figuring that out. But I don't know, because we were so big and we were all over the US and Canada were like our two biggest countries. I don't know that people are like, oh, I saw so-and-so at this event. Sometimes bigger cities like New York and San Francisco, that would happen. But yeah, I think people just need to sort of feel welcomed and encouraged and all of that,
Do you have any specific examples of when you started to see people like really buy into Tech Ladies as a brand and feel like they were like become an advocate for brand and beyond just like an engaged user?
Yeah. So I think something that showed me that was happening, which was really exciting, is like people would say, hey, we're hiring a software engineer. I told our HR person to reach out to you, or just directly introducing them, like bringing us business. We like never asked for that at all in the community. We just sent an email with a bunch of jobs. We were helping people out, connecting people, like just doing a lot for them, having them do a lot for each other, hosting the space, hosting the webinars. Like we did put a lot out on a really consistent schedule, which I think helps. But I think when I saw that it was resonating when people would do that, like they would be like, well, you obviously have to get this on Tech Ladies. And that helped us grow a lot. And we never asked for it, but it was just like they're in this community and they had a good experience because they got help on things they needed. And now we're top of mind when they know that there's like a new role opening. And so people would just do that just to be helpful. And that got us on the radar of like a lot of hiring managers with no budget, you know, without ever needing to like run an ad or do like lead gen on LinkedIn. Like we had like no marketing budget for years, basically. We would just run the community and like hope that they would tell people about it. And that really worked. And that's a lot of how we got started really building a really large hiring side to our business.
That's great because that is really the end goal. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe that sounds like a little crass to say that that's the end goal of a community. I think there's inherent value in the people connecting and stuff, but it's a perfect example of, right, like community marketing working in the long term because you give them a positive experience, you give them somewhere to be and to engage with people, and then your brand becomes top of mind. How would you, for someone who is maybe at a company and is like, believes in community marketing as a long-term strategy, sees the value in it, how would you encourage them to talk to, maybe the founder or whoever the decision maker is? How would you tell them to tell the story of community marketing and to like explain its value?
I would probably suggest something like, if I wanted to pitch it to a higher up, I would suggest something with a really long time horizon built in. And I would tell a story of like one person in that community bringing in some business at the end, right? So what would that look like? It would be like painting a picture of like, what does month one look like for this person? Oh, they signed up and dropped an intro. After a year, what have they done? Oh, they've made 2 or 3 connections in the community. After year 2, what did they do? If this was something like Tech Days, you'd be like, oh, well, they actually told their HR person to go, do this. And then, the way we would think about it would be like, it was free to join. So we were like, okay, what's the value of somebody joining? It's really hard to do that when you have like a free product and a paid product. So we kind of just had to take a really long time horizon. I would pitch it like that. Are you okay with like in a few years, if there's this outcome, but there's also other outcomes. Like we did have a paid version of the community. So like, what's the percentage of people that will convert to the paid version of the community? That's an outcome that this free person could have. Then it's like, what else? Maybe they find a job on Tech Ladies. That's worth, in the tech world, especially if it was an engineering job, that's worth a lot of money, And so like one person having an outcome like that could support all these other people coming in for free who maybe never take action, but they get some value out of it. And so it's like not about trying to squeeze value out of every single person. It's just like finding out if we had a few paths where a few people were doing these things that helped us grow, is that worth all this time and effort we put into running the community? And for us, it was like, absolutely yes. There was like, I can't imagine building that business in any other way.
So who do you think maybe isn't the right fit for community marketing in that case?
You mean for like types of businesses?
Yeah.
I think it really just depends on the types of founders and leadership and what their tolerance is for long-term like horizons on and return on marketing. Because I think that it was a little bit easy for us in the sense that like we didn't raise any venture capital. I was a solo founder. And although I was like, I got to make this a big thing, like I had a lot of like hustle and energy in me. We ran it for 8 years. This was also like a while ago now, but I'm like, it was like my shot. I was all in, but I also had this ability to be like, it's okay to take my time. So I think some balance of being like, we have to figure out how to make money today, but also it's okay to take our time on these longer things. So it's finding somebody, if you have leadership that can work like that, but it doesn't mean that you're making $0 while you're, just spending time having fun in a community. Like, no, like, it's like, you have to have a couple things going at once and you have to just mentally be able to be like, that's the thing we do that we're cool with it paying off later.
Do you think there's any value with communities, not just on like the, direct conversion to sales side eventually, or, getting people to, provide revenue through like a paid membership or something? Beyond all of that, do you think there is value in a community because it provides some sort of like direct feedback loop between potential prospects and the company?
Oh my God. Yeah. It's one of like the best parts about it is that it's sort of like your world's best focus group without being a focus group. So, and it doesn't have to be gross. Like, I don't mean this in a gross way. So what I mean by that is like, we would literally be like, okay, we're about to book out our events for the next month. And we would
Mm-hmm.
say, let's look at the community. What are people talking about? Because we would come up with these ideas and we're like, oh, it'd be cool to do something on AI or what blockchain or what. And we'd be like, no, wait, what are they talking about? Oh, everybody's stressed over this thing that's happening with their manager. Can we get a career coach to come speak about that? And so it helped us be like a little bit ahead always without needing to like have focus groups or polls or things like that.
Yeah.
And that's really great too, because you don't have to ask anything of anybody. You're just kind of going in and observing. The other thing is that like when people feel they're being asked something, like a lot of people don't know what they want. They don't know what they would pay for, you know, but in a community, they're having legitimate conversations. And so if you can extrapolate from these conversations of what would be helpful for them, that helped us figure out what projects to build. It helped us guide companies on like, stop saying this or that in your job posting. This was like the early days of diversity, equity, inclusion. We'd be like, everybody hates that you're asking for a ninja or a superstar, you know, like we were like, we see that in our community and we could go back to our clients and like tell them this kind of stuff. That's a really minor example, but, and so, you know, and it was all anonymous. We were never like, so-and-so said this. It was just things we gathered. And so, yeah, it also helps you stay ahead of your competition for real because it was such like a tight knit loop, especially if you have somewhat of a small team where the ability to feed that in and then act really quickly on it. So we didn't book our events like 3 months out. We booked them like 1 or 2 months out so we could see what people were talking about at the time. So we knew what they would actually want to come to.
Are there any other, like, there might not be, but are there any other unexpected benefits like that you don't think that maybe people think of top of mind when they think about community marketing?
Yeah, I think another benefit that, and something that really surprised me is that people like to help other people. This is something we really need to like focus on now in 2024, is that that's still true. And actually what it comes from is like, you get almost like a little bit of a dopamine hit. If someone's asking something and they're really struggling with it and you experience that thing and have something valuable to say, like for a while I was like, wow, everybody's just so generous. And then I learned that like, yes, they're being generous and it's wonderful, but they also got something out of being able to share and feel like an expert and feel useful. Like it feels good to feel useful when you can share a comment of something that somebody's struggling and you say something and they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. I'm going to go do that thing. And so we had women encouraging each other to like negotiate, ask for more money, get huge salary bumps from this kind of supportive community. So it especially helps if you've got people coming together who actually have problems that need to be solved. Like women in tech have and still have a lot of problems and a lot of struggle. Like being in a male-dominated industry is really hard, and being able to talk to other women and non-binary people about it is really helpful. And so if you can find something like that where you can actually get to people's pain points and help solve them, that helps a lot. But I was surprised at how much people were willing to take time out of their day and help each other. But it was usually only when they happened to see something that they knew a lot about and could share.
Yeah. I love that point that you're making though, because, you know, a lot of the companies that we work with at least are in the B2B SaaS world. And I think there is something like uniquely powerful to bringing in a human element, you know, and bringing in some amount of like connection into it, because there is, I think for so many people, there's such a like, I don't know if abstract would be the right word, but like a lot of their day-to-day stuff is like here, right? And it's like, it's tech, it's impersonal maybe. And I think part of the power of community marketing is that it like taps into that part of people that do want to help others, that do want to connect, that and I, you know, we were actually on the Growth Accelerators episode from last week, we were saying something similar. It was on the topic of thought leadership, and a similar point kind of came up, right? Where it just seems like at the end of the day, people are people, and like marketing that hits on that point, or, you know, like enables people to feel more human is probably a good place.
Yeah, and even if it is B2B sales, right? Like something that you're like, well, how are we going to get those people to, like in tech ladies, I'm talking about all this emotional stuff. It's like that came out of, you know, just this really challenging type of job to have and type of person to be. So then you're like, okay, well, what if you just get a bunch of people who are all just working on something together? And it's like, well, you also have to remember that like your community should serve as a space for what this person can't get somewhere else. So like they go home, maybe they talk to a spouse who works in a totally different field. They can't talk to them about B2B sales or whatever, you know, and then it's like, okay, they're only connecting with people on this if they go to a conference once a year, right? Like, so finding those, like, where's the gap in their actual life for where they get to discuss these things? and then how can you be the space for that, can be really helpful.
Well, I think we're running up against the clock, so I'll leave us off with that. But this has been great, Allison. So thank you so much for coming on and joining us today. For anyone who's tuning in, we're here every Thursday, usually at 12:30 p.m. Eastern with the Growth Accelerator. So if you have any topics, anything you'd like us to discuss or bring an expert on about, just let us know. But Allison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.